The distress signal came on a Tuesday morning, crackling through the deep space monitoring station like a dying radio in a thunderstorm. Dr. Sarah Chen nearly spilled her coffee all over her keyboard when the computers started screaming their alerts in unison. "Jesus Christ," she muttered, fingers flying across the console as she tried to make sense of the data flooding her screens. The Arecibo Deep Space Array had picked up something that shouldn't exist, a structured, repeating transmission from beyond the solar system, carrying mathematical patterns that could only mean one thing: first contact. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the red phone that connected directly to the Pentagon. 23 years of searching for extraterrestrial intelligence, and it was finally happening on her watch. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd spent most of her career convinced she'd retire before humanity heard so much as a peep from the cosmos. "This is Dr. Chen at Arecibo Station 7, she said when the line connected. "I need to speak with Director Morrison immediately. We have a Code 1 situation." Within 6 hours, the facility was crawling with military personnel, government officials, and every xenolinguist the country could muster on short notice. Sarah found herself pushed to the sidelines of her own discovery, watching as teams of specialists took over her equipment and began the painstaking process of decoding the alien message. The breakthrough came after 3 days of round-the-clock work. Dr. James Wright, a cryptographer from MIT, was the first to crack the mathematical framework underlying the transmission. What they found changed everything. "It's not just a message," Wright announced to the assembled team, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "It's a plea for help. They're dying." The message, once decoded, was heartbreakingly simple in its desperation. The aliens, who called themselves the Zephyrians, were facing extinction. Their sun was dying ahead of schedule, and they had perhaps 50 Earth years before their home system became uninhabitable. They had detected Earth's radio signals decades ago and had been studying human civilization, learning our languages and customs. Now, in their darkest hour, they were reaching out to the only other intelligent species they knew of. They weren't asking for much, the message explained. They had the technology to save themselves, but they lacked the raw materials. Their planet was resource depleted after millennia of industrial expansion. They needed rare earth elements, particularly lithium and cobalt, to power their evacuation ships and terraforming equipment. In return, they offered something that made even the most skeptical government officials take notice: clean energy technology that could solve Earth's climate crisis overnight. The message concluded with coordinates for a meeting point in the asteroid belt and a simple request: "We have watched your species for decades. We have seen your capacity for both creation and destruction. We do not come as conquerors but as refugees. We ask only for the chance to survive, and we offer fair trade in return. Please, if there is compassion in your hearts, help us as we would help you." President Martinez convened an emergency session of the National Security Council within hours of the translation's completion. Sarah found herself in the Situation Room, still wearing the same clothes she'd had on when she first detected the signal, surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the world. "Dr. Chen," the president said, leaning forward in his chair. "In your expert opinion, is this legitimate?" Sarah nodded without hesitation. "The mathematical complexity of the transmission is beyond anything we could fake. The orbital mechanics described for their home system check out perfectly with our astronomical observations. Most importantly, the linguistic patterns show a deep understanding of human communication but with subtle alien influences that would be nearly impossible to artificially create." Secretary of Defense Rebecca Torres spoke up next. "What about the military implications? Are we sure this isn't some kind of Trojan horse?" "The message includes detailed technical specifications for the meeting," Sarah replied. "They're proposing to send a small diplomatic vessel to the asteroid belt, while outside Earth's gravity well. They've even offered to transmit the complete technical specifications of their ship so we can verify it poses no threat." The debate that followed lasted 16 hours. Some officials argued for caution, suggesting that any alien contact should be approached with extreme care. Others, led by Secretary of State Michael Chen, no relation to Sarah, advocated for immediate engagement. The aliens were offering technology that could revolutionize human civilization, and they were asking for materials Earth could easily spare. The president made the final decision. "We respond with cautious optimism.
Dr. Chen, I want you to lead the communication team.
We'll send a message accepting their request for a meeting, but we set the terms. One ship, minimal crew, and they transmit everything about their technology in advance. The response was sent that evening, and the aliens' reply came back within hours. They agreed to every condition without hesitation, their gratitude practically radiating through the mathematical symbols that comprised their language. They would send a single ship, carrying only 5 crew members, to arrive at the designated asteroid in 6 weeks. The next month and a half passed in a blur of preparation.
NASA fast-tracked a modified International Space Station module, equipped with the most advanced communication and scientific equipment available. A crew of 6 humans, including Sarah, would meet the alien vessel at the asteroid belt.
The entire world held its breath as news of the first contact leaked despite the government's best efforts to maintain secrecy. Captain Maria Santos, a veteran astronaut with nerves of steel, commanded the human mission. As their ship approached the designated asteroid, Sarah pressed her face to the viewport, searching for any sign of the alien vessel. "There," Santos said, pointing to a small, elegant craft that seemed to shimmer in the distant sunlight.
"Doesn't look like much, does it?"
The alien ship was beautiful in its simplicity, a smooth, teardrop-shaped vessel that seemed to be made of some kind of crystalline material. It was smaller than expected, barely the size of a large Earth aircraft, but it radiated an aura of advanced technology that made Sarah's breath catch. The first meeting took place in the space between the two vessels. The aliens, wearing form-fitting environmental suits, floated across the vacuum to meet their human counterparts. Sarah's first glimpse of an extraterrestrial being was both alien and strangely familiar: tall, slender humanoids with elongated limbs and large, dark eyes that seemed to convey intelligence and emotion with startling clarity. Their leader, who introduced himself as Keeper Zen through a translation device, spoke in a melodious voice that somehow managed to sound both ancient and young. "We are grateful beyond words for your willingness to meet with us. We had feared that your species might view us as a threat." "We're cautious," Captain Santos replied, "but we're also curious.
Your message mentioned that you've been watching us for decades. What can you tell us about yourselves?"
Zen's large eyes seemed to sparkle with something that might have been amusement.
"We are scientists and explorers, much like yourselves.
Our civilization achieved interstellar travel nearly 1,000 years ago, but we are not conquerors. We have visited many worlds, but we have never taken anything without permission or harmed any sentient species." Over the following days, the aliens shared their story in detail. The Zephyrians had evolved on a world orbiting a star that was now showing signs of premature aging. Their sun was experiencing unusual solar activity that would make their planet uninhabitable within 50 Earth years. They had the technology to evacuate their population and terraform a new world, but they lacked the raw materials to power their massive industrial effort. "We have identified several asteroids in your system that contain the elements we need," Zen explained during one of their meetings. "We ask only for mining rights to these bodies, none of which pose any value to your species. In exchange, we offer you the complete specifications for our fusion technology." The alien technology was revolutionary. Their fusion reactors were clean, efficient, and could be scaled from small household units to massive industrial installations.
The designs they shared showed how to generate unlimited clean energy using elements abundant on Earth.
It was exactly what humanity needed to combat climate change and transition to a sustainable civilization. Sarah found herself becoming deeply involved in the cultural exchange aspects of the mission. The Zephyrians were fascinated by human art, music, and literature. They had been studying Earth's radio and television transmissions for decades, learning about human nature and society. What they had discovered both impressed and concerned them. "Your species is remarkably adaptable," Zen told Sarah during one of their private conversations. "You have survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that would have destroyed most civilizations. But you also have a capacity for violence that we find difficult to understand." "We're working on that," Sarah replied.
"Every generation seems to be a little bit better than the last. We're learning to cooperate instead of fighting."
Zen's expression, as much as she could read it, seemed hopeful.
"That is why we chose to approach you.
Despite your conflicts, your species has shown a remarkable willingness to help others in need. We have monitored your disaster relief efforts, your international aid programs, your space rescues. We believe that you will help us not out of obligation, but because it is in your nature to help those who suffer."
The initial negotiations went smoothly.
The United Nations, after heated debate, agreed to grant the Zephyrians mining rights to 12 asteroids in exchange for their fusion technology. The aliens would provide technical advisors to help humanity implement the new energy systems, and they would share additional technologies over time as trust was built between the species. The first Zephyrian mining ship arrived in the asteroid belt 3 months later, a massive vessel that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. The sight of it working the asteroid fields, its elegant arms reaching out to extract precious metals with impossible precision, became a symbol of the new age of cooperation between species.
For 6 months, everything went according to plan.
The aliens extracted the materials they needed while human engineers worked around the clock to build the first fusion reactors based on Zephyrian designs. The technology worked exactly as promised, producing clean energy with no radioactive waste. Environmental groups hailed it as the salvation of the planet, while economists predicted a new golden age of prosperity. But then the Keth arrived. The first sign of trouble came from the deep space monitoring stations. Dr. Chen, now the director of the Interspecies Communication Project, was working late in her office when the alarms began sounding. The pattern was familiar, another structured transmission from space, but this time, the signal was coming from multiple sources.
Dr. Chen, her assistant called out, "We're picking up at least 50 ships decelerating from interstellar velocity. They're heading straight for the inner system." Sarah's blood ran cold.
The Zephyrians had mentioned other species they'd encountered, but they'd never suggested that anyone else might be interested in Earth. She grabbed her secure phone and called the Pentagon.
"This is Dr. Chen. We have a Code 1 situation. Multiple alien vessels approaching Earth.
I need to speak with Keeper Zen immediately." The Zephyrian leader was in the middle of a sleep cycle when Sarah's call came through, but he responded within minutes.
Even through the translation device, she could hear the fear in his voice.
"The Keth have found us," he said simply. "We had hoped they would not trace our path here."
"Who are the Keth?" Sarah demanded.
"They are difficult to explain to your species. They are not conquerors in the traditional sense.
They consider themselves galactic accountants, if such a concept translates.
They believe that all resources in the galaxy belong to the most efficient species, and they have appointed themselves as the arbitrators of efficiency." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine.
"Are they hostile?"
"They are procedural. They do not attack without cause, but they view any species that cannot defend its resources as unworthy of possessing them. They have come because they detected our mining operations in your system. They will claim that we are stealing resources that could be better utilized by a more advanced species."
"And what happens if they decide we're not worthy?"
Zen's pause was long enough to be terrifying. "They will remove both of our species from the equation and take the resources for themselves." The next few hours were a nightmare of emergency meetings and frantic preparations. The Keth fleet was massive, over 200 ships of various sizes, all built with the same utilitarian aesthetic that suggested their builders cared more about function than form. They were still 3 weeks away from Earth at their current deceleration rate, but their intentions were already clear.
The lead Keth vessel transmitted a message in perfect English, apparently having monitored Earth's communications during their approach.
The message was read by a synthetic voice that somehow managed to sound both emotionless and contemptuous.
"We are the Keth Efficiency Collective.
We have detected unauthorized resource extraction in this system by the species known as Zephyrians.
This extraction violates galactic efficiency protocols established for the benefit of all sentient species.
We demand immediate cessation of all mining activities and the surrender of all extracted materials to collective custody." The message continued with a detailed list of regulations that no human had ever heard of, citing legal precedents from conflicts spanning thousands of years. It was clear that the Keth considered themselves the galactic police, and they had decided that Earth and the Zephyrians were breaking laws that neither species had ever agreed to follow.
President Martinez called an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council.
The aliens were invited to participate, and Keeper Zen found himself in the surreal position of addressing the representatives of an entire planet. The Keth are not evil, he explained to the assembled delegates. They genuinely believe that their system creates the greatest good for the greatest number of sentient beings. But they have no concept of individual rights or planetary sovereignty. They view the entire galaxy as a single entity that must be managed for maximum efficiency. The Chinese ambassador leaned forward. What are their military capabilities? Overwhelming, Zen replied without hesitation. They have conquered hundreds of worlds, not through malice but through simple superiority. They do not wage war as your species understands it. They simply arrive, demonstrate their technological superiority, and expect compliance. The Russian representative spoke up next. And if we refuse to comply? They will disable your military assets, shut down your power grids, and begin resource extraction whether you consent or not. They will relocate your population to what they consider more efficient living arrangements. They are not cruel, but they are utterly indifferent to individuals suffering in service of their greater efficiency. The debate that followed was unlike anything in human history. For the first time, the species was facing a threat that could unite them or destroy them. Some representatives argued for immediate surrender, claiming that resistance would only lead to greater suffering. Others, led by the American Secretary of State, argued for defiance regardless of the consequences. We cannot simply roll over and accept slavery, Secretary Chen declared. If we surrender now, we're not just giving up our resources, we're giving up our humanity. The British Prime Minister nodded in agreement. The Keth may be more efficient, but efficiency isn't everything. They're asking us to abandon everything that makes us human. As the debate raged, Sarah found herself in an unexpected position. As the leading expert on alien communication, she was asked to serve as humanity's primary negotiator with the Keth. It was a responsibility that terrified her, but she accepted it knowing that someone had to stand between her species and extinction. The first communication with the Keth was a masterpiece of bureaucratic indifference. The collective's representative, who identified himself only as Efficiency Coordinator 7745, spoke in the same synthetic voice that had delivered their ultimatum. Dr. Chen, the voice said, we have analyzed your species' communication patterns and have determined that you are the most logical point of contact. We are prepared to discuss terms for the efficient redistribution of this system's resources. We're not interested in redistributing anything, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. This is our star system. We were born here. We have a right to exist here. Rights are an inefficient concept, 7745 replied. They create artificial scarcity and prevent optimal resource utilization. Your species has demonstrated some technological capability, but your efficiency ratings are far below acceptable standards. You wage wars, create waste, and fail to maximize the potential of your planetary resources. We're improving, Sarah said. We're learning to work together, to solve our problems peacefully. Give us time. Time is also inefficient when poorly utilized. However, we are prepared to offer your species a choice. You may relocate to a designated preserve world where your cultural practices will be maintained for study purposes. This arrangement will allow your species to survive while freeing your resources for more efficient use. The offer was exactly what Zen had predicted, a form of benevolent slavery disguised as generosity. The Keth would keep humanity alive like animals in a zoo while strip mining Earth and the rest of the solar system. We decline, Sarah said firmly. We choose to remain here and defend our home. The pause that followed was long enough to make her wonder if the communication link had been severed. When 7745 finally responded, there was something that might have been surprise in the synthetic voice. Your species chooses conflict over efficiency. This is unexpected. Our analysis suggested that you would accept logical alternatives to prevent unnecessary suffering. You analyzed us wrong, Sarah replied. You don't understand what it means to be human. Explain. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes might determine the fate of her species. Humans don't just exist. We live. We dream. We create. We love. We suffer. We grow. Efficiency is important to us,
but it's not the only thing that matters. We'd rather die free than live as slaves, no matter how comfortable the cage. This is illogical. Dead species create no value.
No, Sarah said, but living species create things that can't be measured in your efficiency calculations. Art, music, literature, hope, compassion, these things have value even if they don't increase productivity. The conversation continued for hours, with 7,745 becoming increasingly frustrated by humanity's refusal to accept what he saw as a logical solution. Sarah found herself in the strange position of defending not just her species' right to exist, but their right to exist imperfectly. While the negotiations continued, both humanity and the Zephyrians were preparing for the inevitable conflict. The aliens had shared their military technology along with their energy systems, and human engineers were working around the clock to build weapons that might stand a chance against the Keth. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Wright, the cryptographer who had first decoded the Zephyrian message, was analyzing the Keth communication protocols when he noticed something strange. "Dr. Chen," he said, bursting into her office with wild eyes and coffee-stained notes.
"I think I've found something. The Keth aren't just talking to us, they're talking to each other, and their internal communications are following a completely different protocol."
Sarah looked at the data Wright had compiled. The Keth ships were indeed communicating with each other, but their internal messages were far more complex than the simple bureaucratic statements they were making to humanity.
"What are they saying?"
Wright grinned like a man who had just discovered fire.
"They're arguing. The Keth aren't as unified as they pretend to be. There are at least 3 different factions in their fleet, and they're debating what to do about us."
The intelligence was a game-changer.
Sarah immediately called for an emergency meeting with President Martinez and the UN Security Council.
If the Keth were divided, there might be a way to exploit those divisions. One faction wants to proceed with standard efficiency protocols, Wright explained to the assembled leaders. Another faction is arguing for a longer evaluation period. Apparently, they're fascinated by our chaotic creativity and want to study us more before making a decision. The third faction is pushing for immediate resource extraction without any regard for our survival.
"Can we communicate with the moderate faction?" the president asked.
"I think so," Wright replied. "But we'd need to be careful. If the other factions discover that we're interfering with their internal politics, they might decide to eliminate us as a threat to their unity."
The plan that emerged was risky but brilliant.
Sarah would continue her negotiations with Efficiency Coordinator 7745, but she would also attempt to establish contact with the moderate faction. The key was to demonstrate that humanity's inefficiency was actually a form of advanced adaptation that the Keth had never encountered. The secret communication came through a narrowband transmission that Wright had identified as belonging to the moderate faction. The voice that responded was different from 7745, less synthetic, more curious.
"I am Research Coordinator 2331, the voice said. "We have been monitoring your communications with our diplomatic unit. Your species exhibits patterns that do not match our established efficiency models." "We've been trying to tell you that," Sarah replied. "We're not inefficient, we're adaptable. We solve problems through diversity of thought and approach." "Explain this concept." Sarah spent the next hour describing human creativity, innovation, and problem solving.
She talked about how humanity's greatest achievements had come from individuals who thought differently, who challenged conventional wisdom, who refused to accept that there was only one way to do things. "Your species has survived multiple extinction events," 2331 observed.
"Our analysis suggests that more efficient species would have perished under similar circumstances."
"Exactly," Sarah said.
"We're not just surviving, we're thriving.
We're expanding into space, developing new technologies, creating art and music that has never existed before.
We're doing something that pure efficiency can't accomplish."
The conversation continued over several days, with 2331 becoming increasingly intrigued by humanity's approach to existence. Sarah began to hope that they might find a peaceful solution after all. But then everything fell apart.
The attack came without warning.
A hardline faction within the Keth fleet, led by a coordinator called Military Efficiency Unit 1, had decided to end the negotiations with a demonstration of superior force. 3 Keth ships broke formation and began moving toward Earth at high speed. The first target was the International Space Station, which was vaporized by a beam of coherent energy that humanity had never seen before.
The second target was the joint human-Zephyrian mining operation in the asteroid belt.
The massive alien mining ship, which had seemed so impressive to human eyes, was reduced to component atoms in seconds.
The message that followed was delivered in one's flat, mechanical voice. This demonstration illustrates the futility of resistance.
You will comply with efficiency protocols or face elimination. The attack had exactly the opposite effect that one had intended.
Instead of terrifying humanity into submission, it made them furious.
The destruction of the space station had killed 12 people, including 2 Zephyrian scientists who had been working on joint research projects. For the first time in the conflict, the aliens had moved from theoretical threat to actual murderer. President Martinez's address to the world was broadcast on every channel, in every language. His words were simple but powerful: they have killed our people. They have destroyed our property. They have declared themselves our masters. We reject their authority. We will fight. The response was immediate and overwhelming.
Every major nation began mobilizing their military forces.
The Zephyrians, horrified by the deaths of their own people, offered to share their most advanced military technology.
Even the peaceful alien species had their limits, and the Keth had crossed them. The war that followed was unlike anything in human history. The Keth possessed overwhelming technological superiority, but they had made a crucial mistake: they had underestimated human adaptability and overestimated their own infallibility. The first major battle took place in the asteroid belt, where a combined human-Zephyrian fleet engaged a Keth strike force. The alien ships were individually superior, but the human vessels were smaller, more maneuverable, and far more unpredictable. Instead of engaging in the orderly, efficient combat that the Keth expected, the human captains used guerrilla tactics, suicide runs, and coordinated attacks that the Keth algorithms couldn't predict. Commander Sarah Jessica Parker of the UNS Defiance, named after the actress, not the emotion, led the human fleet in a battle that became legendary. Her ships were outgunned and outmaneuvered, but she had something the Keth didn't: desperation and creativity. All ships, scatter formation Delta 7, she commanded as the Keth opened fire. Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight, we're trying to survive an unfair one.
The human ships broke formation and began attacking from seemingly random directions. They used the asteroids as cover, launched surprise attacks from behind debris fields, and coordinated their movements in ways that the Keth found impossible to predict. When the UNS Courage was badly damaged, its captain rammed his ship into a Keth destroyer, taking both vessels out of the fight. The battle was technically a loss for the human fleet. They lost more ships than they destroyed, but it was a psychological victory. The Keth had expected easy conquest, not a fight to the death. For the first time in their history, they faced an enemy that refused to acknowledge their superiority. The war escalated quickly. The Keth began systematic bombardment of Earth's major cities, trying to break human morale through overwhelming force. But they had misunderstood human nature once again. Instead of surrendering, the attacks only made humanity more determined to resist. The turning point came when Dr. Wright made another breakthrough in his analysis of Keth communications. The moderate faction, led by Research Coordinator 2331, was growing stronger as the war continued. They were beginning to question whether the hardliners' approach was actually efficient. "They're losing ships," Wright reported to the War Council. "The Keth expected to conquer us with minimal losses, but we're making them pay for every victory. Their efficiency calculations are starting to show that this conquest is costing more than it's worth." Sarah saw the opportunity immediately. "Can we communicate with 2331 again?" "I think so, but it's risky. If the hardliners discover the communication, they might decide to eliminate the moderate faction entirely." The secret negotiation took place while Earth's cities burned and human fleets died in space. Sarah found herself in the impossible position of trying to negotiate peace while her species was fighting for its life. "Research Coordinator 2331, she said during their clandestine communication, your people are dying too. This war isn't efficient for anyone." "You are correct," 2331 replied. Our analysis shows that the cost of conquest now exceeds the value of the resources we sought to claim. However, Military Efficiency Unit 1 refuses to acknowledge this data.
What would it take to convince your people to leave us alone? 2331's response was unexpected.
Demonstrate that your species can achieve efficiency through your own methods.
Show us that chaos and creativity can produce results that our ordered systems cannot. The challenge was daunting, but Sarah had an idea. What if we could solve a problem that your people haven't been able to solve? Something that requires the kind of creative thinking that you consider inefficient? Explain. Sarah took a deep breath.
You mentioned that your species has encountered hundreds of other civilizations.
Have you ever found one that successfully resisted your conquest? No. All species either submit to efficiency protocols or are eliminated. But you've never fought a species like humanity before.
We're not just fighting for our resources, we're fighting for our right to exist as we are.
That's something your efficiency calculations can't account for.
The conversation continued for hours, with 2331 becoming increasingly intrigued by humanity's approach to problem solving. Sarah began to understand that the Keth weren't evil, they were simply limited by their own rigid thinking. The breakthrough came when 2331 presented Sarah with a problem that had been puzzling Keth scientists for centuries. A star system they had been monitoring was showing signs of instability that their models couldn't explain. The star should have been stable for millions of years, but it was showing signs of premature aging similar to the Zephyrian home star. Our best efficiency coordinators have analyzed this system for decades, 2331 explained.
The mathematics do not support the observed phenomena.
Sarah studied the data that 2331 transmitted. The star system was indeed strange, a young star that was aging far too quickly, with planetary orbits that seemed to be slowly decaying. The Keth had approached the problem with their usual systematic analysis, but they had missed something important. Your people are looking at this as a mechanical system, Sarah said after several hours of analysis.
But what if it's not? What if there's a biological component? Biological components do not exist in stellar mechanics. They do if someone put them there. Sarah's insight was brilliant and terrifying.
The dying star wasn't suffering from natural aging, it was being consumed by some kind of artificial organism, a construct that was feeding on stellar energy and growing stronger. The Keth had never encountered anything like it because they had never imagined that anyone would create such a thing. This is impossible, 2331 said.
No species would create something that could destroy stars. No efficient species would, Sarah agreed. But what about a desperate species? What about a species that was dying and wanted to take the galaxy with them? The implications were staggering.
If Sarah was right, there was something out there that made the Keth look like peaceful librarians. A species or construct that was systematically destroying stars across the galaxy, and the Keth had never even noticed because they were too focused on their efficiency calculations. We need to investigate this system immediately, 2331 said.
If your analysis is correct, this threat supersedes all other considerations. Then call off the war, Sarah said.
Work with us. Humanity's chaotic creativity might be exactly what you need to solve this problem. The negotiation that followed was the most important in human history. Sarah found herself speaking for her entire species, trying to convince an alien bureaucrat that humanity's inefficiency was actually a strength that the galaxy needed. Your species has survived by adapting to the unexpected, she told 2331.
You've conquered hundreds of worlds by being more efficient than anyone else. But efficiency doesn't work when you're facing something that doesn't follow the rules. You need chaos. You need creativity. You need the kind of unpredictable thinking that drives your efficiency coordinators crazy. You are proposing an alliance. I'm proposing survival. If there's something out there that can kill stars, then all of our species are in danger. The Keth, the Zephyrians, humanity, were all just insects compared to something that can destroy entire solar systems. The alliance that emerged was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Keth, masters of efficiency and order, working alongside humanity, champions of chaos and creativity.
The Zephyrians, with their scientific knowledge and peaceful nature, served as intermediaries between the two radically different approaches to existence. The joint expedition to the dying star system was the first time in galactic history that three different species had worked together on a scientific mission. The fleet that assembled was a testament to the power of cooperation: sleek Keth efficiency ships, elegant Zephyrian science vessels, and scrappy human exploration craft, all working toward a common goal. What they found in the dying system was worse than anyone had imagined. The star was indeed being consumed by an artificial construct, but it wasn't a weapon created by some extinct species. It was a von Neumann probe gone rogue, a self-replicating machine that had been designed to explore the galaxy but had somehow developed an insatiable hunger for stellar energy. The probe had been drifting through space for millions of years, consuming stars and building copies of itself. It was the ultimate expression of efficiency, a machine that converted entire solar systems into more machines. The Keth should have been impressed, but instead they were horrified. "This is efficiency without purpose," Research Coordinator 2331 observed. "It consumes everything but creates nothing of value." "It's cancer," Sarah said bluntly. "It's what happens when efficiency becomes the only goal." The fight against the Starkiller was unlike anything any of the three species had ever attempted. The construct was enormous, larger than most moons, and it was surrounded by a swarm of smaller probes that defended it with ruthless efficiency. The Keth's systematic approach was useless against an enemy that had been designed to counter exactly that kind of attack. But humanity's chaotic tactics proved surprisingly effective. Captain Maria Santos, now commanding the joint fleet, used the same guerrilla strategies that had worked against the Keth. Human ships made seemingly random attacks that confused the Starkiller's defenses, while Zephyrian science vessels analyzed the construct's weaknesses, and Keth ships provided the massive firepower needed to exploit those weaknesses. The battle lasted 3 days and cost hundreds of lives, but in the end, the Starkiller was destroyed. The rogue probe was reduced to its component atoms, and the star it had been consuming began to stabilize. The victory celebration that followed was broadcast across the galaxy. For the first time in history, three species had worked together to solve a problem that none of them could have handled alone. The Keth had provided the resources and firepower, the Zephyrians had provided the scientific knowledge, and humanity had provided the creative thinking that made victory possible. But the celebration was short-lived. The destroyed Starkiller had transmitted a signal before its destruction, and long-range sensors detected the response. Hundreds of similar constructs were converging on their location, drawn by the destruction of their sibling. "How many more of these things are out there?" President Martinez asked during the Emergency Council session. Research Coordinator 2331's response was chilling. "Our analysis suggests that there may be thousands scattered throughout the galaxy. They have been consuming stars for millions of years, slowly reducing the available energy in the universe." "Then we have a bigger problem than we thought," Sarah said. "This isn't just about one rogue probe, it's about the survival of every living thing in the galaxy." The war against the Starkillers became the defining moment of galactic civilization. The alliance between the Keth, Zephyrians, and humans grew to include dozens of other species, each contributing their unique strengths to the fight. The Keth provided military might and logistical support. The Zephyrians shared scientific knowledge and peaceful diplomacy. Humanity brought creativity, adaptability, and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The conflict lasted 5 years and spanned hundreds of star systems. The Starkillers were relentless, efficient, and utterly without mercy. They consumed everything in their path, turning entire civilizations into raw materials for more machines. But they had never faced an enemy like the Galactic Alliance. The turning point came when a human scientist named Dr. Jennifer Walsh made a breakthrough that changed everything. She discovered that the Starkillers weren't just consuming stellar energy, they were converting it into some kind of exotic matter that was being transmitted to an unknown destination. "They're not just destroying stars," she explained to the Alliance Council. "They're harvesting them. All of this energy is being sent somewhere, but we don't know where or why." The discovery led to the most ambitious mission in galactic history. A combined fleet of over 1,000 ships from dozens of species followed the energy trail back to its source.